This is the first ever iPhone. It came out in 2007 to a fair amount of skepticism, but I think it's pretty fair to say that's all mostly subsided as the first iPhone proceeded to completely change the world. If you think I'm being a bit dramatic there, if anything it's an understatement. Seriously, this phone has changed everything. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're taking a look at the first ever iPhone. It is without a doubt one of the most influential innovations within human history, and so let's see how it holds up and performs over 12 years later. The first ever iPhone is also known as the iPhone 2G, as it was only capable of utilizing up to 2G networks, so no 3G. At the time, this was the biggest criticism of the iPhone, as well as the price, as it seemed a bit high, especially in comparison to other cell phones at the time, starting at $499 for the 4GB model. Obviously now this seems pretty reasonable, considering most flagships start at around $1,000, but even Apple knew that this phone was a little bit too pricey, which is why the next year with the iPhone 3G, they reduced the starting price to $199, which was a really good deal. That said, while the 3G was the better phone, especially because it could use 3G networks, I've always preferred the design and general feel of the original iPhone. The iPhone 2G has an aluminum body and stainless steel frame with a plastic bottom third for the antennas. This aluminum wasn't particularly the highest quality, and pretty much every iPhone 2G you find nowadays will probably be scratched up to no end. It likely doesn't help that phone cases weren't commonplace yet, but durability-wise these phones probably could have been better designed. However, like with most of the original iPhone's flaws, I'm willing to give it a pass because it's just that, the first iPhone. Regardless of the scratches, I can't help but feel that this is a really good-looking phone, and the aluminum I think was a good choice, especially given that Apple would end up switching back to it in 2012 with the iPhone 5. On the bottom of the phone we have the 30-pin charging port, and that would be used until the iPhone 4S. There's also, of course, the speakers, which aren't that good, but do the job. On the top of the phone we have the power button, the headphone jack, and the giant SIM tray. The headphone jack was actually a pretty big flaw in the design of this phone. Because it's so inset there, most headphones other than the headphones that came with the phone couldn't fit inside the port. This was poor design, and it was quickly fixed with the iPhone 3G. On the side of the phone we have the mute switch and volume buttons. This is pretty much what we have now with the iPhone 11 Pro, so I guess that's kind of cool. Speaking of which, this is the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Look at that size difference. Man, phones have gotten so much bigger nowadays, and it doesn't even feel like they're that big, but they really are. On the front of the phone we have some giant bezels as well as a 3.5-inch display. Obviously mine here is cracked, which is a little unfortunate, but my other one isn't quite as bad. This one's a bit more scratched up in the screen, but the bottom corner there just has a little tiny crack, so not too bad. You're gonna be hard pressed to find an iPhone 2G nowadays that doesn't have some kind of problem. Either it's gonna be dead pixels or a cracked screen. Of course, they exist without those things, but generally speaking, they have some kind of flaw or they're going to be very expensive. But anyways, we have a 3.5-inch display with a resolution of 320 by 480 and pixel density of 165 pixels per inch. This isn't a good display. Of course, the Retina display wouldn't come until 2010, and so this one was pretty solid for 2007. Under the screen, we have the first ever home button. Not a whole lot to say about that, other than that the home button is finally starting to disappear off some of the newer iPhones. There are still a couple being sold by Apple, namely the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, and so the iconic legacy of the home button does live on, but it won't be that long until there are no home buttons left, so enjoy it while it lasts. Above the screen we have the speaker grill and no selfie camera, so if you want to take selfies, you gotta do it like this. Oh yeah, and the volume buttons don't work to take pictures either. I was trying to do that. I forgot about that. So it has to face you, and you have to manage to hit the camera button. So yeah, not ideal. Speaking of the camera, it really isn't that good. It has 2 megapixels and can't record video, at least stock. You can jailbreak it and make it record video, but I'm not sure why you'd want to. This camera, even for the time, was never amazing. It was fine, but not too much more than that. You can see some pictures here. They're unique and kind of cool in that they have that vintage feel to them, but you definitely wouldn't want to be using this phone anymore as your main driver, especially when it comes to the camera. Overall though, I mean, the camera does perform better than I would have expected. Here's a couple comparisons comparisons between the iPhone 2G and the 11 Pro Max, suffice to say we've come a long way, although at least the 2G is capable of taking photos, even if they aren't spectacular. And you know what, again, they aren't as bad as you would expect. When it came to storage options with the first iPhone, 4 and 8 gigabytes were available at launch, and soon after 16 gigabytes would be an option. Pretty impressive that 16 gigs was around for the first ever iPhone, especially because that was the minimum storage option for iPhones all the way up to the iPhone 6s and SE in 2015 and early 2016. The battery on this phone is a bit small at 1400 mAh, but considering the phone doesn't exactly have a lot of power to push, it can do alright, especially if you're just on standby mode. I've left this phone on, just not using it for like 2 weeks before and it was still alive, so that's kinda crazy. I'd say back in the day, it probably lasted you pretty okay, but definitely not anymore. And how does this phone perform just overall nowadays? Well, let's talk about specs. The phone has a 412 MHz processor and 128 megabytes of RAM. The iPhone 2G runs up to iPhone OS 3. You heard me, iPhone OS. That's what they used to call it before iOS 4. I am just gonna call it iOS for simplicity's sake, but originally it was called iPhone OS. Anyways, it can get up to iOS 3.1.3, which, as you would expect, considering we're on iOS 13 now, leaves you pretty limited. There really aren't any apps you can download on here without jailbreaking and sideloading them, so for the most part, this thing is pretty useless. In theory, if you had a SIM card, you could call and text with SMS, but it's a bit complicated. Most carriers do not support 2G networks anymore. AT&T shut it down in 2017, Verizon is going to shut it down at the end of 2019, and T-Mobile is planning on shutting it down sometime in 2020. Obviously, these are just American carriers, but I think they're the most notable, especially since the original iPhone was locked to AT&T, which means that if you buy a brand new iPhone 2G for like 20 grand or whatever it'll cost you, there's literally no way for you to connect to cellular at all. You can jailbreak it and unlock it from there, but regardless, 2G is dying and it's dying quickly. You can connect to internet with Wi-Fi on here, which is kind of neat, so you can go to Google and actually do some internet browsing. It's slow and painful, but you can look at news or something. Weirdly enough, YouTube doesn't work at all. It just won't load in the page for me. I'm not sure if this is the case for everyone, although on Twitter it seems like a couple others were having this problem as well. Not sure exactly why this is, but I know there are ways to get around it theoretically if you jailbroke. That being said, I'm not sure why you'd put that much work into getting YouTube working for your iPhone 2G, so overall it kind of works for the internet, just not very well. This phone is really cool, and just looking at the basic home screen and swiping around a bit, it isn't that much different from iOS 13, which is insane. It's still the same grid layout with a dock at the bottom. This phone did so many things right when it came out. Is it usable 12 years later? Sadly, no. But you can jailbreak it and mess around with it if you'd like to, and even do some modifications that make it look like iOS 7. So if you guys want to see a video on some of the things you can do with this phone, let me know. That'd be kind of fun. I love the first iPhone, and while it doesn't hold up 12 years later, I mean, who thought it ever would? And you really can't deny the significance this phone has in history. The iPhone will forever be seen as the turning point in technology, where it became less of a tool and more of a daily driver and essential part of our lives. When's the last time you went out without your cell phone? I don't remember the last time I did. This is all thanks to the first iPhone, and who knows what technology would look like today without it. And with that, I'm pretty much done here. This was just a quick nostalgic look at the first ever iPhone, and if you all want some more content on it, you can let me know by hitting that like button and maybe subscribing if you haven't already. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you want to for some reason. With that all being said, I'm Josh from 91tech, and I will see you all next time.